So I had this eye-opening experience that same year that I had the breakup and the death of my grandma. I was so depressed because of this breakup and just an array of things. I didn't know what I want to fucking do. I was driving one day, and my car at the time was a Trans Am, like rear wheel drive, old school muscle car, and I had just gotten it washed, and I was driving in the fast lane on the highway, and I was like flying, because like you can't drive slow in a fucking V8 muscle car.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking to myself, like, I'm so fucking depressed. Like, what am I going to do? Like, I'm so sad. Like, I was like debating texting her. Like, it was just a low point in my life. And I just remember feeling this like dread, just like, like life sucks, And then the next thing I know, the car in front of me is braking, right? So I have to slam on my brakes, and I slightly turn my wheel, and I'm in the fast lane. And the next thing I know, I am fucking hydroplaning. I'm spinning. And I'm like going across the highway, and I just remember being in the moment, and the complete flip of emotions of being sad and depressed to being like, holy shit, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. Like that sort of mind fuck was wild. And I just remember the whole time I'm just like closing my eyes. It felt like an hour, but it was like 20 seconds. The next thing I know, I'm on the shoulder of the highway facing the other way, and I'm unscathed. And my mood went from being so pessimistic to so grateful. And I think we get wrapped up in our daily lives, that we become consumed with our disappointments, our expectations. And it sometimes takes these near-death experiences to realize how fortunate we are to fucking be alive, to breathe. And I kind of wanted to explore that in the swim. Obviously, so the water is life, like we're all floating down a stream, and we're fighting currents, and we're trying to learn how to swim. We're trying to keep ourselves from drowning. And in that story, he is all in his head. He's like, I feel like a failure. Life sucks. My wife sucks. I can't get a blowjob, all this shit. Like, these are common themes, people might think about, And he goes for this swim. And, he's lost in his head, and he's thinking, and he's like, oh, this is great for me, like this is going to help. And, he's so focused on just swimming and beating his record. And the next thing you know, he's trapped against the current, and he's like, holy fucking shit. Like, I can't make it back. And like, I wanted to capture that whole sentiment of like being completely depressed and like wanting to give up on life. There's an excerpt in there. He's like, is there anything more depressing than knowing you're worth dead, you're worth more dead than alive. Yeah. And, to see the complete flip of him knowing that he's stuck in this current, and he is trying his hardest to swim back, and you would think in the beginning he'd be like, oh, this is great, but he's like so overwhelmed. He's crying. He's like, holy shit, I don't want to die. And I wanted to push that further, where he kind of gets this sense of peace in the end, where he's like, he has to acquiesce to it. Like, this is what happened. You made a shitty decision, shitty circumstance. And, he gets this vision of his daughters and his wife in the future, and they're so happy. And, he has to cope with his circumstances. And I wanted to really capture that dichotomy of like depression and just like, wanting to die, to completely being like, holy shit, I don't want to die, and I think that is something that is universal. It's a concept that people can kind of relate to, because I feel like we get caught up in such bullshit,
Something I wanted to ask you is, what advice would you have for people about combining substances with creativity? And as a podcaster, I've drank obviously while I'm podcasting. I've smoked while I'm podcasting. I do a bit of writing when I'm trying to plan out videos or other sort of content. And it's a constant battle to adjust the dosages or how often I want to smoke or drink or be sober, whatever it is. Like, am I adding to my creativity? Am I taking away from it? Like, what is this? What advice would you have for people that are kind of like navigating those waters? Because I don't think it's not a good or bad thing, no matter how much people say that. Oh, you don't need substances to create, or you do need substances to create. That's not what I'm asking. I want to know, like, in a world where you have felt certain effects from being high as fuck and writing a great story, or being 2 or 3 drinks deep and you just all of a sudden get an idea for a video or a podcast, or you think of something, that substance basically puts your mind at a level that you may have not been able to get to that place without that enhancement, for lack of a better word.
No, I understand exactly.
What would be your advice for people trying to navigate those waters, and what has that been like for you when you're creating that relationship with substances?
So you know, there's an old adage, and you know, it's kind of confounded with whether Hemingway said it or DeVry said it, but there's this old saying that says, write drunk, edit sober. And for me, like, I'm not gonna, you know, advocate for dropping acid or shrooms and then just go try and write a manuscript, you know. Like, I mean, you'll go on a journey, but I don't know if you need to write it down. But I do think there's a happy medium, you know. For me, like, you know, marijuana has been a creative elixir for me, but I'm not sitting around, you know, smoking blunts all day. Like, I'll take, you know, a couple of hits, kind of get your mind set. I think that there's a happy medium. I do think that it's harder to edit a blank page than it is to edit something with shitty writing. So as long as you can get it out there, I think that's a great step. I do think you need a level of consciousness to write to some capacity if it's going to be any good. You know,
so
and
you
like,
can't be completely
you
gone.
can't. You can't. I mean, you got to take a little bit to take the inhibition off. Like, for me personally, when I write, like, sometimes I'll write it and I'll be like, this fucking sucks, you know, like, I don't want to write this. But sometimes if I get a little buzz going, I'll be like, fuck it.
Something to quiet the voice in your head that's telling you it's shitty.
And I think that that's kind of a microcosm from life. We're always trying to kind of quiet that voice that says, like, you're not enough, you fucking suck, you know. Like, we're always trying to abate that sort of voice from crippling us. I
heard on Tim Ferriss, he had an investor, Naval Ravikant, on recently.
That's the guy that does the bulletproof, or 5 bullets or something like that.
Tim Ferriss does 5 Bullet Friday.
There you go.
His through line for his podcast is that he talks to people that he considers at the top of their field, whatever it is. And so he has Naval Ravikant, who's an investor, and they talk about the roommate inside your head, and that Naval's advice was you should treat the voice in your head like a person, like a roommate, because you wouldn't, if your roommate was constantly telling you, hey, when you go to work today, that presentation is going to be the shittiest thing you've ever done.
Oh, absolutely.
Or you're never going to amount to anything in your life. You would tell your roommate to shut the fuck up, or you would tell him to get out, and you weren't going to live with him anymore. So if you treated the voice in your head like a person, you would give it much less leeway, and you would talk back to it. He talks about like verbally talking back, and whether it's in his head or out loud, saying, you know, go fuck yourself, basically, to this voice in your head. And since I heard him talk about that, this is probably a couple months ago on the podcast, I've definitely felt a positive effect from hearing those voices in my head, wherever they're coming from, saying, you know, this is gonna be the shittiest podcast you've ever recorded, or you're an imposter. you have no business talking. No one gives a fuck about what you're doing, which may be true, but at the same time, I still feel excited by it. So I want to do it, and treating that voice like a roommate has given me more freedom in navigating that relationship.